So we're going to get started. I'm going to do a quick introduction of Andre and Jeff. Where they're tag teaming this presentation. So Andre is going to go first, then Jeff, and we'll leave Q&A. Andre Faul is a pasture-based regenerative farmer at Faul Family Riverside Farm in Henry County, Kentucky. The farm's focus is to heal the land using livestock while simultaneously raising healthy, nutrient-dense meats. They currently raise broilers, turkeys, hogs, sheep, and cattle on the 100-acre farm. The farm's tobacco barn serves as an event venue where they host weddings and events. And I'm sure that might look a little different now in COVID, but I know that you've had some great community gatherings out there. So I'm glad that's in there. Definitely let us know what you have open for 2020, up and coming events for 2021, because it's always a good time. And Jeff Maddox is with us today as well. He has 20 years experience working with organic, pastured, and sustainable livestock. He assists and educates farmers with management practices that increase animal health, productivity, and return income from poultry and swine. Jeff is actively involved in diet formulation for all types of livestock and poultry for organic and sustainable farmers. Jeff's been with us for a lot of conferences through the years. He does work at Fertrell and is a great partner on programming and educational events, and they're in the virtual trade show there as well. So definitely stop by there and check them out as well. So thank you both for being here, sharing your expertise, and it's all yours. I'm going to stop screen sharing. Let you all go for it.
All right. Let me get this thing pulled up here. All right. Thank you, Brooke. As she mentioned, my name is Andre Faul. Up here at the Faul Family Riverside Farm in Henry County. Let's see. Just a little bit of a quick introduction on our farm. In Henry County, Kentucky, we started farming full-time in 2017. We currently do broilers, layers, turkeys, hogs, grass-fed lamb, and beef. We also manage a barn wedding venue and an Airbnb in the old farmhouse that we renovated. And then this is sort of a little side project of mine, as my background is in marine fish rearing. We hope to start production again on our saltwater shrimp program that we started about 2 years ago with the help of Kentucky State University. And so we're hoping to get that going again. But today we're going to talk about Pastured Poultry. That's the first thing we started to do on the farm. Just a brief outline of what we're going to talk about, brooder management, shelter design, pasture management, and then transport and transporting to the processor. We don't do processing on the farm, but just sort of the steps you need to do to get your chickens to the processor effectively, and so they all get there alive. So starting out with the brooder, that's probably the most important step of this whole process, is giving the chicks a good start, because that will ensure that they are happy and healthy on pasture and they don't encounter any problems later on through their life. Brooder size considerations, we're looking at about 1/2 square foot per chick initially, and then 1 square foot at 3 weeks. When we first bring in the day-old chicks, we sort of crowd them tighter than 1/2 square foot per chick, about 1/4 square foot, so they're all rolled nice and tight. We have food access everywhere for them, because and Jeff will touch on this as well, but getting them to eat those first 3 days is really critical to them developing a sufficient appetite, so they'll continue to eat and be ravenous as they are. So that's the first 3 days are really critical. Providing fresh water to them is also important. The other thing that we started using wood shavings, which worked okay, but since switching to peat moss, I highly recommend using peat moss. it absorbs moisture a lot better. It keeps down the ammonia smell that can build up when using wood shavings. It's a little bit more pricey than the wood shavings, but I think it makes up for it in how it absorbs the moisture better and just keeps the environment a little cleaner. It does have a lot of dust in it, so that's the only thing you have to deal with. But other than that, I really like it. Let's see. The other big consideration is proper heat and ventilation within your brooder. You don't want to have any drafts in the brooder, but then again, you want to have enough fresh air coming in. I use these Ohio brooder boxes that we built. It's just a 4x4 box. You can kind of see it in the background there that's elevated, and there's 2 heat lamps inside, and there's a reflective material that I attach to the top of the box. And you can crowd a day-old chicks, even up to a week-old, crowd about 250 to 300 of them can crowd up underneath there. And even if they sit towards the outside of it, they're still getting the benefit of the heat. I found that's just a more efficient way to give them heat. Ultimately, using the propane heaters that you find in the poultry houses would be the next step, and we might be looking at that soon. But so far, the Ohio brooder boxes have really worked well for us. Let's see. Let's move on to the next one. So, talk briefly about our shelter design. We started like everybody else. We started with the Salatin chicken tractors. Built a couple of those. You started using them, and then I just wanted something that was a little bit more, I guess, easier on my back. I'm still young, but I'm getting older every day, so I want to make sure that I can do this for a while. So we wanted to get something where we can put more chickens in and move it with some sort of either a tractor or a vehicle. So in one of the APA publications, there was an article with Dave Shields at Pasture Life Farms. He builds these mobile hoop structures, and that can hold about 250 to 300 birds. So, but I modified the design a little bit, but that's where I got the inspiration. I changed some things just based on the material that I had on hand to build these hoop structures. They're 32 feet long by 12 feet wide. Use fencing top rail that I bend into hoops for the hoops. And then, so 2 10-foot pieces to bend it, so 20-foot hoop, and use just 4x4 wood skids, attach the hoops to that, close the front and the back off with some chicken wire, and and then put that heavy duty white tarp over it. And then we move it on the front of our farm Jeep. We put a winch and with a wireless remote control. So we just hook up the winch to the shelter there and winch it forward, one space, and that's it. And it moves slow enough, and we get in the shelter to be, ensure that everybody's moving with it. So it works pretty well. We have hanging feeders in there and waters, and then we just use plastic gutters that we attach to both sides of the shelter that runs the length of it to have more feeding space. In the wintertime, we'll close the back off with some just plastic. You can get this like PVC metal or PVC roofing panels. We just close off the back with those to stop the wind from coming in there, and it keeps them nice and warm. The only issue you're gonna have to deal with is when it rains. Water can get underneath the shelter, and they can get a little wet underneath there. And then the other thing, initially we put a hot wire around the bottom of it, and I have just a battery powered energizer that I power. That powers that hot wire, so just to avoid anything from digging underneath it. You know, could be a raccoon or a muskrat or what, you know, there's so many things want to eat chicken. So it just keeps them from digging underneath it and grabbing them out of there. So let's see, I think I touched on all those. So basic pasture management when they're out on pasture, you know, when the chicks are 3 weeks old, we generally move them out to pasture around 3 weeks. You want to pick a day where it's, you know, nice and sunny out, preferably not pouring down rain and cold, because you want to give them a day or two to adjust to pasture with nice weather. In the past, we used to load them up in chicken crates and transport them out there and unload them. You know, it was a lot of work for one person, 1 or 2 people, and kills your back. So last year I started using our small livestock trailer. I would build sort of a walkway inside the brooder and then back the trailer up to the door and load and just count, you know, roughly 300 birds I'll put in the walkway and then sort of just shoo them up into the trailer, close it up, drive it to the shelter, back it up to the door, open the door, and they just walk into the shelter. So I felt that was not only easier for me, but easier on the birds, a little less stress, and it didn't hurt my back as much. So that worked out really well. As I mentioned, we close the back of the shelter when there's weather coming, especially in the early springtime. We would close it off, and then later in the fall we'll close it up again, keep them nice and warm in there. There have been times where we got a lot of rain and water got underneath the shelter, and we had, you know, pools of water in there. So I'd go out and put some hay down just to get the chickens off the wet ground, and that worked really well. It's a bit of a pain, but at least you can move around in this shelter, and you're not, you know, crawling on your elbows and knees in there. So the stocking density for these shelters, as I mentioned, they're, you know, 32 feet by 12 feet. So this previous year we were doing about 275 to 300 birds in the shelter, and I found that that's a bit too much, especially when we're getting to about, you know, 6 to 8 weeks old. It gets pretty crowded in there. There's still plenty of room for them, but in terms of ensuring enough feeding space and all that, it gets a little crowded. So this year we're going to add another shelter to our group, and then going to just drop it down to 200 birds per shelter. I think that'll work. That'll be a real good number for them, for these shelters. As I mentioned, the hot wire feeder space, we use 6 of those hanging feeders. I think they're 30-pound feeders you can buy from QC Supply, and then those plastic gutters. We do things a little differently than most people. I don't know if it's because of my background in marine fish rearing, where we were all, you know, when we raise those fish, feed is super expensive. So we are very diligent about how much we feed, and we feed them based on growth, and monitor a lot of things to be able to be as efficient as possible with feed. It's also a way of seeing if there's any disease issues or if the animals are healthy, because generally an animal that's sick will not be, you know, as inclined to come to the feeder. So I'll give you an idea of which birds might be sick. So we try to give the birds access to about roughly 8 hours of feed daily. We kind of judge that based on how much they're eating and how much is left in the feeder after, you know, after they're done eating. The biggest thing here is to have enough feeding space, because they're going to be hungry in the morning when you feed them. So having enough feeder space is critical, so everybody gets a chance to eat, and they're not climbing on each other and scratching each other. That's part of the issue. Some of the issue that we had this year was birds getting on top of each other and, you know, scratching each other open. So we had not a huge problem, but we had some birds with some scratches on the back. And this is purely anecdotal for me and my experience with doing this restricted feeding, that we've seen lower incidence of heart attacks and ascites, I think that's how you pronounce it, in my experience. You know, we don't see a lot of heart attacks in the summertime. And I think it has to do with the fact that we're not giving them 24-hour access to feed. So let's see, covered everything in here. So transport and processing, we withdraw feed at least 12 hours before they'll be processed. We load 8 to 9 birds per crate, usually 8 in the summertime. We can do 9 when it's cold outside. Because of the travel time to our butcher, it's about 2.5 hours to the one we currently use. We'll start loading at about 3:30 in the morning. Load the birds from the crates, load them into the trailer, and then leave around 5 a.m. and get up to the butcher around 7:30, depending on traffic. We used to load them the night before and then just let them sit in the crates and get up early and load them in the trailer. But I found that I'm getting up early anyway. So if I'm getting up a little earlier just to load them right in the crates and get them on the trailer, it's less time they have to spend in the crates. Yeah, it's better for the bird, I think. Keeps them, decreases the amount of time they have to spend in those crates. Last year we used a 16-foot livestock trailer. We could fit about 70 crates in there, which was, it was full with crates. There was there was no room for anything else. And then we had a couple crates to go on the back of the pickup truck. In the trailer I use, it's an enclosed trailer, so I had to cut some air vents in the front of the trailer, allow for airflow. Because I'm driving when it's still dark, I haven't had any issues with birds getting too hot in that livestock trailer. I know some people have had issues with putting birds in livestock trailers because they'll get too hot. But as I said, I've hauled them in the middle of the summer with no issue. I think it also has to do with the fact that they're only spending 2.5 hours on the trailer, and they're constantly moving, and the sun's not out. So all those things play a role in making sure that they're safe and that they get to the butcher in all alive. So I think that pretty much covers most of what I have here. Yep.
Thanks, Andre. Do you have contact information you'd like to share, or a social media for the farm that you'd like to share? We'll get that in the chat for everyone.
Yes. Should I just go to the chat and add it there?
Yeah, or we can if you're comfortable with us sharing it.
Yeah, sure. I don't
Okay.
mind. Yeah, we're on Facebook, Instagram. We have a website, faulriversideky.com. You can just search for us on Facebook and Instagram. It should pop up. And yeah.
While you're here, there are a couple questions. I know we're going to leave most of the questions till the end, but is there a hatchery that you're using?
Yeah, I use Bob's Biddies down in Georgia. Been working with them for a while now, and they're awesome. They best prices I could find. Really nice husband and wife that operate the place, and yeah, I've been really impressed with them. So if anybody needs chickens, check them out.
And I see Bree commented here on the chat too for Brootbound Farm, and Mount Healthy hatchery outside Cincinnati is also a resource.
Yeah, we used to use Mount Healthy because they're real close to us. They're also a great resource. I just been using Bob's Biddies because their prices are a little better. So.
Yeah. Well, we have a lot more questions for you, but we're going to move on to Jeff, and we'll come back around to all the questions at the end. Sound good?
Yep. Let me stop my share here.
Okay. Thanks. All right. There you go, Jeff. We can, with this setup, we can see your notes. Can you go full screen?
Yeah, I can't get to that at the moment. Yep, hold on. There we go.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah, perfect. Thanks, sir.
All right. Yep. All right. So we want to talk about optimizing pastured poultry, and people get all, as my Mennonite friends say, they get all frahootled about, they get caught up in the details and sometimes the wrong details. So let's make sure we're doing things right from the beginning. And actually the day before the chick arrives, and Andre talked really good about how he set up his brooder, and I agree with what he's doing. But some things to consider are, you actually want your brooder completely set up 24 hours before the chicks ever arrive. Okay. Everything has to be up to that 95 degrees or that starting temperature before chicks, and it's going to take a while. It's going to take a while for the water to warm up, and it's going to take a while for everything in that environment to get to the right temperature. You don't turn the brooders on when you're emptying the boxes of chicks out. So you're going to do that ahead of time. I've had really good luck with adding 1 cup of dissolved sugar, whatever sugar you're happy with, organic, regular white, it doesn't matter to me, and 2 tablespoons of apple cider vinegar for every gallon of water for that first 24 hours. So mix that up ahead of time, mix it with warm water so that way it doesn't, it's warm enough when the chicks show up. Um, Depending on who you're using for your feed source, try to get feed that has been made as fresh as possible. Okay. I put on here within 7 days of the chick arrival. Fresh feed smells way better. For those of you who've had chickens in the past, you go get feed, as soon as you open that bag, you notice a big difference in the smell of that feed versus feed that you've had for a couple of weeks or a month or something like that. Well, those chicks are going to notice that smell as well. So the fresher that smell is, the faster we're going to get them on feed. Like Andre talked about, we want to make sure that when you put those chicks out, we want to crowd them 1/4 of a square foot per bird per chick, in that first 72 hours, but we want feed everywhere. I like to put down either brown craft paper or some of that corrugated cardboard without the facing on it. Works really good because they get good traction on that. And you're putting out piles of feed. So I don't want them to go more than about a foot, and they're either running into food or water in that first 72 hours. So the first 2 days, keep that up. And then on day 3, you can start removing some of the paper or the cardboard, or, and you can start opening them up a little bit. Now, what you're trying to do here is, I'd like for you to go back and check the crop fill. So on the front of the chick at the base of the neck, there's a spot, that's where the crop is. We want to make sure that that crop gets filled, emptied, and refilled, hopefully within the first 24 hours. And Andre touched on this. They learn, or they don't learn, they develop their appetite for how they're going to eat for their entire life in that first 3 days that you have them, first 72 hours. So they have to learn how to eat and drink and where to find it, in that first 3 days. If we don't set that appetite pattern, they're not going to develop correctly. You're not going to be happy, and then you're going to blame it on the hatchery for sending you bad birds when actually, the chick needed a little bit more encouragement to get off to the right start. And then the other thing is fresh air. I see a lot of brooder setups out there. People bundle it up tight, right? There's no air, there's nothing in there. And I'm glad that Andre touched on that as well. You have to have air exchange in that brooder. And you should be exchanging that air, complete air exchange, 4 to 6 times in a 24-hour period. Okay. You want fresh air in there, right? You don't want it. Yeah, you want it to be warm, and I get that. But if the air isn't fresh, they're not going to thrive. So day 1 to 3 on the farm, touched on this a little bit. Gently place the chicks into the prepared brooder. You want to you want to spend some time observing those chicks to make sure that they're comfortable. You want to look for any unusual behavior, because this is when things, you've heard nightmares about people having piling issues or maybe pecking issues, or, chicks not, they're doing something weird. So in that first day, try and visit the brooder as often as you can, making adjustments in the heaters, where's the propane, where's the heat source, make sure that you have the right distribution, making sure that the birds are finding food and water correctly. Day two, repeat what you did on day one, just repeat. All right. But you can start removing that brown paper with the feed on the floor. Um, honestly, folks, observation is the number one failure for successful brooding. I see it over and over again. I've been working with Pastured Poultry folks now for 25 years. And people who spend more time paying attention in their brooder, they end up with mortality rates at 3%. Okay. And that's for not just the brooder, that's 3% for the entire life of the flock. And also those observations and those adjustments in the brooder probably will end up at a half a pound more carcass weight. If you're making those little adjustments early on and you're paying attention to those needs, it's going to add up in the end. It's going to pay you in final saleable chicken or eggs in the end. Be aware of lethargic chicks. Okay. So when you go into the brooder, a few sleeping is fine, but if they seem lethargic, it could actually be that lack of oxygen and the need for exchanging air on a regular basis. So I recommend you can do, some people do a one feed all the way through, and I'm fine with that. But ideally, if you can find it, you want a really good, high quality, 21% protein. You're only going to feed 2 pounds of starter in that first 3 weeks in the brooder. So plan on about 2 pounds of feed. When they show up, those birds should get 1 inch of feeder space. Now that's straight line feeder space, trough tile type feeding. But you want 1 inch of feeder space minimum for those chicks. And try and, get the highest quality feed that you can afford or that you're willing to invest in. It's going to pay off in the end. Okay. Honestly, going to pay off in the end. Don't look just for the cheapest feed out there. I see this all the time. People shop around. They think all feeds are created equal. And I can tell you that they're not even close to created equal. So after you get out of the brooder, you want to transition them over to an 18% protein grower feed. It's going to start somewhere in that beginning of week 4 through the finish. Probably going to need about 9 pounds of that. If management's good, the feed's good. The reason I put the pounds on here is so you can kind of use that as a measuring tool, but about 9 pounds of grower feed. Those birds in the field should be 3 inches of feeder space. Again, that's for a straight type feeder, not a round. If you're doing round, it's about 2 inches of feeder space. Again, high quality feed. Don't shop around for who has the cheapest feed. You're not going to finish these birds on time. These Cornish cross, if that's what you're raising, are bred to harvest or be ready for market somewhere between 38 and 45 days. Okay. And that's with a 4-pound carcass weight, which is what the average family wants. Okay. Now you may have customers who want bigger birds, but these birds are really designed, bred, selected, and efficient enough to be ready at 7 weeks of age if we're good enough managers to get them there. Just some specs for what you're looking for in feed. So if you're shopping around, you're talking to different feed mills, these are the top 7 things that you need to be aware of when you're looking at feed. Most of these, the energy's not, but most of these, like the protein, the calcium, the phosphorus, the vitamin A, and the methionine, have to be on a correct feed label. So you can check by that. You can also ask the feed guy for more of a detailed nutrient profile or a calculated nutrient profile. Just make sure that they're hitting the marks, okay? You don't want to be below these numbers. You're not going to have fun. your chicks aren't going to thrive, and you're going to cut into your profitability and your efficiency. So this is kind of an outline of what nutrients you're looking for if you're looking for a good high quality feed. The other thing is if you're not getting a pelleted feed, you want a coarse textured feed, right? This is what it would look like in the picture on the right. And, you know, believe it or not, other than the whole grains of corn, even those young chicks can handle these particle sizes, right? As long as you're providing grit, those birds can process this. You know, when you're looking for high quality feed, you're looking for the higher nutrient levels, you're looking for premium ingredients. There's no byproducts. If you look close at that feed picture, there's no byproducts in there, right? It's corn, it's roasted soybeans, it's oats, you know, there's some fish meal, some alfalfa meal in there, and it's a good high quality. So you're looking for premium ingredients. You want to talk to the feed mill about what are their quality checks? Are they testing the grains for mycotoxins, aflatoxins? Are they testing their grains for quality as far as protein and nutrients? I've touched on it. You want a good grind size. You do not want powder. Chickens don't like powder. Try and find something that doesn't have byproducts. Byproducts are used to bring the price down. It does not help the chick finish any faster. And be aware if there's any fillers in there, things that are actually don't add anything nutritionally to the feed that are, you know, that they're adding just to keep the cost down. And I want to remind everybody, that's the last slide that I have, but we do have a Pastured Poultry meetup on Saturday. And I will be there to answer questions that we don't get done, you know, in this session. I want to thank you all. That's my contact information. Feel free to reach out to me if we don't get the questions answered here. You know, we're here to help you. We want your poultry experience to be a good one. So, yep, that's all I have for you.
Thanks so much, Jeff. I'm going to bring everyone back to gallery view. You can do that as well, or you can do that speaker view. We'll highlight our speakers here. We have a whole bunch of questions. I don't know if you'll watch the chat, but we could talk for a couple more hours. We'll sort of group them. I'm not going to go chronologically. We have them sort of grouped by topic. And again, thanks, Jeff, for plugging that meetup on Saturday. That's a great time to get some more Q&A in and connect with other growers that are doing it and share more there. Okay, so I'm going to sort of start with this group. You know, you all neither of you really spoke about forage management in a pastured system, since it's not the primary source of feed, right, for chicks, but there are a lot of questions about how can you prepare the pasture for chickens to arrive, like, you know, a year in advance or something like that. And let's see, are there, what dual purpose breeds are best at foraging that would be better to consider if you're really looking to sort of maximize their time on pasture? So just curious if you all want to talk a little bit about considerations for preparing the pasture where the chickens will be.
Well, I could touch a little bit on that. You know, part of the reason that we raise chickens on pasture is to improve the quality of the pasture. You know, there's all kinds of things you can do in terms of, you know, growing cover crops and putting down seed, you know, a year in advance, and, you know, all kinds of stuff. But, you know, that's just more input you got to put in to your production, and, you know, the long-term benefits are, I don't know if it's technically worth it to put that expense into it. So for us, I'm using a section of our pasture that has a lot of broom sedge and just a lower quality pasture that we run our birds through, and I can already see the impact of the chicken manure on the pasture. You get, you know, a lot more clovers coming up and just better quality forage coming up after they've gone through. So for us, it's more of a improving existing pasture with the chickens and not getting the pasture improved before we put the chickens on there, if that makes sense.
So Andre, I remember the picture you posted on your Instagram account back in December. Can I share it quickly? I have it pulled up.
Absolutely, yeah.
This is a really great visual. And just a second, just the impact of those tractors moving across the field there.
Yeah, that was from a batch we did in early fall, I believe. I think it was September-ish. And I took that in December, and you could see exactly where where the shelter stood. Just the impact of what they had on the existing pasture. So, imagine that sort of effect on the whole pasture. That's kind of what we're looking for.
Yeah,
And then,
and I agree with Andre. I would not go out and spend a bunch of seed and do a lot of pasture prep. What we're finding is there's plenty of seed already in the seed bank, already sitting in the soil. So when the chickens go over it, their manure is going to stimulate a lot of the red clovers and things like that, and or whatever's there. And chicken manure is one of the best germinating fertilizers you're ever going to find. So I don't know that I would go out and do a whole lot of pre-prep on it. I don't see the investment, the return on the investment. And the biggest reason is in a chicken's diet, the highest level that I have seen in all these years is 15% reduction in feed. And that was a person who was grazing on a pure alfalfa stand and was managing it at a lower height. So he was cutting it appropriately ahead of the chickens, so it was the right height when they got there. If you added his fuel time for mowing it and managing it and the cost of putting that alfalfa in, did the 15% pay for his time and his effort? Probably not. So we're using the chickens to improve the pastures. So even trying to seek out a dual purpose breed to that one question, the highest level that we're ever going to get from eating grass is probably between 5 and 10%. There are some breeds that do a little bit better at it, but it's not significant enough to, make that decision, on what breed, because even the modern breeds, the sex-linked layers and stuff like that, they eat grass. And if it's the right kind of grass, but don't think that we're putting chickens on green because they like the green. What they're looking for are the bugs and the other, the insects and the small reptiles and, the invertebrates, and that's what they're after.
Great. Okay, next question. Folks are interested in different coop models, the brooder model. I know that Andre, you talked about, but the actual design, what's the go-to resource for how to build the brooder or the coop? Do you all have recommendations for those resources people should consider?
I would start sending people to Dave Shields and what he's doing down in Pasture Life Farms. He's got a pretty awesome brooder that he built on a hay wagon, and makes it super easy to get the chicks out to pasture. So he's been a great resource for me. I learned a lot from him. I haven't met him yet, but I look forward to sometime meeting him in the near future. I've used him, and then APA, American Pasture Poultry Association. They have a lot of good resources on brooder design and pasture shelter pasture shelter design and stuff like that.
Great. All right. We have a couple questions. One question, what can you do to minimize predator pressure? How can we better support chickens with increased predator pressure around?
I mean, I don't know, Jeff, do you want to take this one?
Yeah, your first line of defense is either using poultry netting, surrounding the birds with poultry netting, or you keep them in a fixed house like Andre's doing with a hot wire around it. If you want to do the netting, most of the serious pastured poultry folks have gone to guardian dogs. So they're bringing in, instinctual dogs, Great Pyrenees, Anatolians and they bond them with the flock early on, and that's really the only way to control the aerial predators as well as the ground predators. But some of them won't attack on, they won't run off an aerial predator. Some of the raptors, they just think it's another chicken. So, unfortunately, but the dogs seem to be working as good as anything. So that seems to be the number one defense, other than keeping them enclosed, which is what, like Andre's running them, with a hot wire around it. I mean, that's ideally the best, but
I mean, obviously, if you're running layers, we do layers as well, and we just use poultry netting. But I have seen people use guard geese, throw a couple geese in there with them, and seems to help with keeping predators down.
Yeah, on that, Andre, actually, what we're learning is you only want one goose. If you put a male and a female in there, when it's mating season, they won't protect the flock. So you only want one. Hopefully, you can get a male from somebody because he's meaner than the females are. And but yeah, a guard goose works really good.
Yeah.
Okay. If folks are having cannibalism issues with 9-week-old layer chicks, what would be some things to double check or adjust in the management plan?
It depends on what part of the body they're pecking. So, I mean, if they're pecking out the large feathers on the tail head, that's a pretty good sign that they're crowded. And if they're pecking out the feathers just in front of the tail head on the back, that's a pretty good sign that it's a methionine deficiency. So it's a feed deficiency at that point. Especially the key here is, are they eating the feathers? So if the birds are eating the feathers, that's a sure sign that the protein and or the methionine is lacking.
Jeff, have you experienced, if you have them in a like say in a hoop house environment where the light is really bright,
yeah,
that they'll start pecking each other? I've seen that too.
Yeah, intense light. People don't understand. They'd prefer to be under a shade tree. They are not sun worshipers. So if the light's too intense, when they're pecking from that, I often see it at the back of the head. So where a chicken pecks each other is kind of the indicator of what the stress is. But pecking comes from stress, and too much light intensity can definitely be. But if they're pecking head, back of the neck situation, I would go for too much light intensity.
Okay. What's a realistic egg laying life for a laying hen?
With or without a molt. I mean, you can get an egg layer to lay for 72 or even 80 weeks continuous. But that's, her body or her instinct is to shut down and do a molt for 60 to 90 days in the fall of the year on descending light. So if people are willing to molt them correctly, you can keep laying hens for 5-6 years. It's kind of a management thing. I don't find that to be cost effective. The most cost effective is to get your replacement pullets at 16 or 18 weeks of age. You run them for a year, and you already have the next flock, coming in ready to go to replace them.
Mm-hmm. Have you found a minimum number of birds to be profitable? How many rounds processed per year? So this is specifically about broilers, I suppose.
I mean, last year we did, what was it, 6 batches of birds, like roughly 600 per batch. It's all about economies of scale in the end. If you're raising 100 birds, your costs are going to be a lot higher on everything because you're not getting discounts on feed. Your price per bird to transport them to the processor is going to be higher. If you're taking only 100 birds as opposed to 600 birds, it's the same amount of fuel to take 600 as opposed to 100, roughly. I mean, but so, and then I guess it also depends on what your, what your goal is for raising poultry. Is it just, as a side business, sort of a hobby thing? Is it as your main income source? That would all depend on how many birds would be, make sense for it to be profitable. It's hard to put an exact number on it because you obviously want to start out small and build your market, and then you grow from there. Because jumping in with doing too many birds at the beginning, you're gonna end up with freezers full of chicken that you can't sell. So I don't know, Jeff, you want to add anything to that?
No, I mean, you clarified it. Most people start out with like 200 the first year, and they use that as their market builders. You know, whether they're giving out samples, they're reaching out to friends and family, they're starting their network of potential. But unless you're getting above that 10,000 bird mark, if that's the only thing you're doing, I mean, unless you get above the 10,000 bird mark, you're still going to be doing an off-farm job or something like that. You've got to diversify. You can't count all your money in just chickens. It's just not going to, especially in Kentucky. You know, you're fighting rural chicken prices, and people think, man, if you charge more than $1.79 for a pound for chicken, you're ripping them off. So it's tough selling down there. It's not easy.
So there's the most recent question in the chat here is for Andre. Where are you selling that many birds? Wholesale, retail, direct to consumer, et cetera. So maybe just a little bit about marketing. We have a lot more about initial production stuff, but
most of my birds go to direct to consumer. I have one restaurant account that's been on and off because of COVID, but we built a website about a year and a half ago for people that do online ordering. We do home delivery and UPS shipping now. And so my focus from the beginning was direct to consumer, because ultimately that's where most of the money is. You get your best margins there. We do work with two other farms in CSA, where we provide the chicken and turkey products, and then the other farm provides beef and pork, and some vegetables, and then the third farm also some vegetables, some various other value-added products. So those three avenues are what my focus is, but majority of my stuff goes direct to consumer.
Thanks for that. We have a couple more here, sort of feed related. Any thoughts on soaking feed?
Again, I'm happy to share the field trial, but we have some farmers here at Fertrell that use our land, and one of their trials last year was actually wetting and soaking the feed. The birds ate it better, but in the end, they saw no increase in weight gain, and they saw no increase in feed conversion. So they had the expenditure of their time wetting that feed on a daily basis, but they saw no positive results from soaking or wetting the feed.
How much grit should people put out per chick or per area?
I really wish people would just put it in their feed at 25 pounds per ton, but it should be free choice, and it should be like at the end of the feeder or in the same feeder as the feed is, so they don't have to go looking for it. Meat birds don't eat, broiler chicks don't eat a lot of grit in their lifetime. They're only going to eat between 6 and 8 ounces from beginning to end, maybe a pound at the most. Laying hens will eat a little bit more than that, but turkeys are really the big grit users. So anybody that wants to raise turkeys, gotta have it free choice, really needs to be in the feed. But yeah, I would rather see it go right in the feed. If they can get their feed mill to put it in at 25 pounds per ton, that's a way better way to go than trying to hand feed it or spoon feed it. But if they have to, just sprinkle it on top of the feed every day. If there's some left over in the bottom of the feed, then they've got enough. They know when to stop. So
Andre, did you mention where you're getting feed from? Might be just to share a bit about feed sources in Kentucky
Yeah, sure.
and or get certified organic feed or not, that kind of thing.
Sure, yeah. Currently, I get all my feed for all of our animals from Kentucky Organic Farm and Feed down in southern Kentucky.
Guthrie, Kentucky, yeah.
Guthrie, yep. So they're great people to work with. I mean, for organic feed, just from my limited research on it, they have some of the best prices that I could find around. So and they come up here to Louisville every month, second week of every month. They'll bring the feed truck up here and drop off feed. So been really great to work with them, and the quality of their feed is just top notch. It's really good stuff.
Thanks for that. Okay, thinking about, there's a little bit about processing, and maybe we can frame this a little bit. For folks who are interested in getting started with pastured poultry, processing is an important part of that equation, and there are unique challenges everywhere. But maybe, Andre, you want to talk a little bit about what people could expect in Kentucky, or questions they might want to be thinking about now?
Yeah, I mean, especially for this year, if you're going to be processing any birds this year, I'd get on the phone today and start calling processors, because they're already booking up. I didn't think that it would carry over to 2021, but apparently the processing demand has continued. So whether it's for red meat processors or for chicken processing, in the past, before COVID and everything, I would do all my planning in January anyway. I would call the hatchery and book all my dates. I'd call the processor and book all my dates. Make sure I have it all lined up. But in terms of processors, I used to use Misty Lee Processing down in actually close to Coffee, down just outside Guthrie. I was with them for a while, and then been jumping back and forth. But I also use Kings and Sons Poultry Processing up in Dayton, Ohio now. They're a little bit closer to me, and they offer a little bit more variety and value-added products. So they have chicken brats, various types of chicken brats. They do ground chicken, chicken sausage, chicken patties, all kinds of value-added things that you can add to your list of products to sell. Because I saw somebody asked about prefer selling whole birds or parts. I started selling whole birds. I'd prefer to just sell them all as whole birds. That'd be better. It's better for me. It's less cost to the processor. But the problem is not a lot of people want to buy a whole chicken. A lot of people don't know how to cook it. So that's the other issue you run into. So, when I first started selling chicken, I just went in with the notion that I'll just sell a whole chicken. It's better for me. It's better for everybody. So let's educate everybody how to do it. But then, you find out quickly that people want boneless, skinless breasts instead. So we started doing cuts, and now we're selling all the cuts and ground chicken, chicken sausage, chicken brats. Just to diversify and give people options.
Sounds great. Thinking about too, just for folks in the room, for considerations about organic certification with Pasture Poultry, both the cropland has to be certified organic, and then you have to certify the livestock. And then if you want a final product that is certified organic, you have to have it processed at a processor that also is certified. So it's 3 tiers there. And there is currently one processor in Kentucky, Central Kentucky Meats, that is certified for organic processing and is processing poultry. And I don't even know if you could get on the wait list at this point. Central Kentucky Meats. So just all the things to consider when it comes to processing, especially right now. Okay, looking at the time, we have 5 minutes and just a couple more questions. So the feed, Andre, you mentioned your feed containers and you had some great pictures there. There are a couple questions about the watering systems. Could you share some details about your water setup? And Jeff, please add to this as well. People are saying they've had issues with the nipples getting clogged, and would love to hear some alternative options.
Yeah, so I use a nipple drinker in the brooder. It's a like a game bird drinker. But out in pasture, I use the bell waterers. You get them on QC Supply sells them. They basically just connect up to a 5-gallon bucket, and you refill the 5-gallon bucket, and it gravity feeds down to the bell water. Those work really well for these birds. Just all you have to do is set the height. About the height of the back of the chicken, and as they get older, you just raise it up as they get bigger. But so I just right now the system is just taking 5-gallon buckets, and I have a hay wagon out there next to the shelters with a 250-gallon IBC tote on, and I'll just fill 5-gallon buckets and carry it into the shelter and fill the buckets that are hanging that feed the bell waters. I'm working on a more efficient system, trying to hook it up to that IBC tote so it's an automatic sort of watering system. But yeah, I'll eventually get to that.
Yeah, depending on, I mean, the nipples, depending on, they're very pressure sensitive. So the water reservoir or the pressure system supplying to them, you can only have, like if you're doing the 5-gallon bucket like Andre or whatever your water supply to that nipple line is, it should be filtered water because they are easy to clog. 2, you can't have too much pressure or the nipples won't activate when the chick hits them. So, and then a lot of people think all the nipples are the same. There's actually layer nipples, there's turkey nipples, there's chick nipples. They make nipple drinkers for each class of poultry. And people just go on and buy 100 nipples, and they didn't pay attention. Did they get layer nipples? Did they get broiler nipples? So anyway, make sure that you have the right one. Make sure that you don't have your water source too high because you're applying too much pressure to that nipple. So that would be my suggestion. Andre, if you can, it's important not to change your feed and water delivery devices from the brooder to the field. So before you take them out of the brooder, make sure they know what the red bell waterers are, and that's for the benefit of everybody here. You're doing a great job, but you can confuse your animals if you change the color and shape of what they're supposed to be eating and drinking from. So
yeah, I have to add that I use the nipple drinker in the brooder, but I also have a couple standing waterers in there with the red bottoms.
Yeah.
To give them more water. The nipple drinker is sort of just as an emergency if the other ones run out. But yeah, that's a good point.
Okay, last question, specifically about marketing unique cuts. What's the best way to move those chicken backs, feet, livers, etc.?
Yeah, so like if you're getting into pasture poultry, you're always going to end up having a freezer full of chicken backs. I've found that getting some chicken stock made, especially in the wintertime, is a great way to get rid of some of those. You can go to a commercial kitchen. There's a couple places. I know there's one in Louisville that they'll rent out a kitchen space for you to make some, chicken stock. And then, you can make pretty good margins on them, but you got to put the time in to make it, or you can have somebody make it for you, which I've ventured into. Chicken liver is a hard one. I mean, people that like chicken liver, they're always asking about it and they love to buy it, but it's, for me, I keep some of it around, but if I get chicken liver from all the chickens that I process, I mean, I have a freezer full of chicken liver. So I keep some of it to keep those people happy. But again, you can make liver pate with it. We've done it before. We've made liver pate with it, and it's awesome. It's really good. So it, yeah, just gotta be creative with the feet. You know, just add it into the broth or the broth that you're making for the chicken stock, and it makes great chicken stock. But again, you don't have to get the feet back. You can, you know, have the processor take care of it. And I actually have seen people take the chicken feet and dry them out in a food dehydrator and give them to dogs as dog treats. So, yeah.
Yeah, up here they sell really good, like $1 a piece for a foot, you know, for dog treats. And Edwin Shankit to Family Cow takes all of his necks, backs, and unsaleable parts like leftover, you know, livers and things like that that don't market, and he's putting them through a large Weston grinder, meat grinder, and it'll handle the bones just fine, and then mixes that up and sells that as a dog pate or a pet, you know. And as long as the chicken bones are fine, as long as they haven't been cooked, they don't splinter, they don't, you know. Plus the grinder's taking them down to a small enough part. So if you can't make broth out of them, you know, make some sort of a pet food type thing. Just don't call it pet food, because the labeling requirements and the regulations on pet food are extremely high. So you have to call it a pet treat.
A treat.
Yep.
All right. Well, thank you both. We are out of time, but I know that there are probably still scores more questions. So we're going to kick it to that Saturday farmer meetup social hour at 3:50. Pasture Poultry meetup for anyone who's interested. Be there. And for now, I just want to have a quick virtual round of applause for Jeff and Andre. Thanks so much for being here with us. Really appreciate your time and expertise. I appreciate all you do and all your sharing. And